We are on two-week cruises back to back on Celebrity Millennium. It didn't quite work out as planned in the end, but it started as it should have done after a 13.5-hour flight from Manchester to Singapore, staying for a couple of nights in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel on Marina Bay. The hotel is very well appointed and even includes a Michelin-starred Chinese restaurant, which we made use of. Our room was enormous, and every aspect of the service was first class, but then it was also quite expensive. We had a view over Marina Bay, and the preparations still going on for the New Year celebrations. We decided to take a walk over to the gardens on the bay. We start by crossing the Helix footbridge across the Singapore River towards the Marina Bay Sands Hotel and Casino. Singapore is full of glitzy shopping malls, and the Marina Bay Sands Centre is no different. We continue our walk along a rooftop boardwalk. From here we have a view of our ship at the cruise terminal alongside its twin sister Constellation, looking down at the atrium of the Sands Hotel. We emerge to a view down across the gardens by the bay. Looking back at the Marina Bay Sands Hotel, which is even more expensive than the Ritz-Carlton. These eggs, which light up at night, are part of an art installation. We took a guided audio tour of the gardens. After boarding Millennium, we had a night on board before departure the following afternoon. After a day at sea, our first stop is Kota Kinabalu on Borneo in Malaysia. Kota Kinabalu is the capital of the state of Sabah and is also being developed as a tourist resort. We shared a taxi with others from the ship to the town centre. There are lots of seafood restaurants, and some of them keep their stock very fresh. This boardwalk area of bars and restaurants looks as if it only comes alive after dark. Another taxi back to the ship. After another sea day, we arrive in Boracay, an island resort in the Philippines. This is just a beach resort with all the facilities that you'd expect from that. So, while more or less everybody else on the ship went ashore by tender with their beach towels, we decided to give ourselves a day at sea, watching the beach resort. Next day, we're in Manila, the capital of the Philippines. Our plan is to visit Intramuras, the old city centre. This involves us finding a taxi driver who's prepared to take us that short distance for a reasonable cost. All the taxi drivers who've come into the port want to take you on half-day or full-day tours. The taxi we got dropped us somewhere near Manila Cathedral. The Philippines were part of the Spanish Empire for about 300 years, and in front of the cathedral is a statue of King Charles IV of Spain. The first cathedral on this site was built in the 1570s, but earthquakes and war have taken their toll, and this version dates from the mid-1950s. Leaving the cathedral, we picked up a rickshaw tour. 2 rickshaws, one pedal-powered, one powered by a motorbike. This monument is to the victims of the various wars which have afflicted the Philippines. St. Augustine Church dates from the early 17th century. Unfortunately, it was closed for a wedding while we were there, so here's a photograph of the inside from Wikipedia. Spain built the city walls in the 1570s, and large parts of them survive till today. This golf course is where the moat used to be. Some of these buildings were used by the Japanese occupation forces, and then some of them by General MacArthur on his return to the Philippines in 1945. A relic of World War II. After a day and a half at sea, we're sailing into Hong Kong Harbour, and the weather is a lot wetter than it's been and a lot colder. From our berth at the Kai Tak cruise terminal, we have a view of Hong Kong Island and Kowloon and the main business district of Hong Kong. The 2 cruise ships at anchor take mainly Chinese guests on short gambling cruises. After lunch, we take the free shuttle bus to Diamond Hill to visit the Chi Lin Nunnery. This large Buddhist temple complex, made entirely of wood, dates only from 1934, but has been built in the Tang dynasty style. Across the road are the Nan Lian Gardens. Back on the ship, after dark, we can see the brightly lit Hong Kong skyline. This is actually Chinese New Year, but it's very quiet, partly because of the recent disturbances, but mainly because of the outbreak of the novel coronavirus. At 8 o'clock, the Hong Kong Symphony of Light show begins. The Kai Tak cruise terminal is built along the runway of the former Kai Tak International Airport. On its roof there is a public park, and we decided to spend an hour of our final morning in Hong Kong there. A day and a half at sea and we arrive in Nha Trang, Vietnam. Nha Trang is a resort and includes a large theme park on an island in the bay. We go ashore by tender to join a ship's tour of the highlights of the city. The first stop is at Nha Trang's largest market. Quite a few stalls were not open, presumably because this is still the Lunar New Year holiday. Next stop is Po Nagar Temple. This was built in the 8th century AD and has elements both of Hinduism and Buddhism. From the site we get a view over modern Nha Trang. Walking back down to rejoin our bus, a closer view of part of Nha Trang's fishing fleet. Next is Chong Rock, which according to Vietnamese legend shows the handprint of one of the ancient immortals. Nearby is a cultural centre where we were able to enjoy a short recital on traditional Vietnamese instruments. Next stop is another temple, but not the one we were scheduled to visit. That was apparently closed to coach parties on this day. We had a long distance photo shot of the large concrete Buddha that we should have seen at the original temple. Our final stop was at a beach resort near the city centre where we had a welcome cool drink. Next morning we're in Phu Mai, which is the port for Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. But we're not going there today, we're going to the local town of Ba Ria. And our first stop is a Buddhist temple. These collections of statues represent stages in the life of the Buddha. The temple is very busy today because of the Lunar New Year. Our next stop is another temple, but this one belongs to the Cao Dai religion. This religion was founded in Vietnam in the 1920s and is a fusion of Christianity, Buddhism, Islam, Chinese Taoism, and various other things. There are thought to be over 4 million followers of Cao Daism. Next, a local market, where there wasn't much happening, as it still was the Lunar New Year holiday. Next, a stop to see a woman making sheets of rice paper, which will be used to wrap spring rolls. They're left to dry in the sun. And a local rice wine distillery. Apparently no need for a license. Finally we visit a traditional family house which has managed to survive the many upheavals in Vietnam of the last couple of centuries. The main reception room is devoted to the cult of the ancestors, some of whom are buried in the garden. The original family are still living here. Sailing back to Singapore at the end of our first cruise, ready to start our second cruise, which is due to go from Singapore to Hong Kong. But early in the morning of that last sea day, we're told this is not to be. Because of the coronavirus outbreak in Asia, the cruise will not end in Hong Kong, but instead will return to Singapore. This means that the 2 stops in Japan can't be made, and instead we will stop again in Manila. The Singapore authorities require that the ship is deep cleaned on turnaround day, so we're all given a free voucher for the hop-on hop-off bus round Singapore. This is Orchard Road, Singapore's great street of affluent consumerism. The Cathay Cinema is a rare Art Deco survivor from the 1930s. Our circuit ends at the Suntec City Mall and its Fountain of Wealth, according to the Guinness Book of Records, the largest fountain in the world. 900 passengers have cancelled for this cruise, so the ship is a lot quieter as it sails off once again to Phu Mai. This time we take a trip to a different local town, Vung Tau. Our first stop is a temple. This one is known as the Whale Temple. It contains the bones of several whales which have been washed ashore. These are venerated by the local fishermen. They believe that praying here will ensure a safe and prosperous voyage. Next, a stop for a glimpse of the 32-metre high statue of Christ, the largest in Asia. Next, another temple. This one is known as the Nirvana Temple and also the Temple of the Reclining Buddha. Next, a colonial house built by a French governor. It's now a museum and sadly it's looking a bit neglected. A street market. And finally to the beach to see the fishing fleet. Next morning we are once again in Nha Trang. As this is essentially a beach resort and we didn't fancy another city tour, we decided to give ourselves a day at sea and stay on board. Next morning we arrive in Chiang Mai, the port for Hue and Da Nang. We are told of another change to our itinerary. Instead of calling at Manila, we will now call at Kota Kinabalu, Malaysia. Chiang Mai is an industrial port and you need transport to get anywhere. We're taking a tour to Hoi An, about an hour and a half away, the other side of Da Nang. Hoi An is a trading town on the Thu Bon River, founded in the 16th century. The old town is in two parts, a Chinese and a Japanese section, connected by a bridge known as the Japanese Bridge. It is extremely well preserved, most of the buildings in the old town dating from the 16th to the 19th century. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It lost its importance as a trading port in the 19th century to Da Nang, but now it's extremely popular with tourists. Several of the old houses have remained much as they were and are open to tourists. Most of the old buildings, though, have been repurposed as bars, restaurants, cafes and high-end shops. This is the assembly hall of the Cantonese community. The Japanese covered bridge dates from 1590. When we get back to the ship that evening, we find that our itinerary has changed again. We will not be visiting Taipei. Instead, we will head north to Halong Bay, where we will have 2 days. However, over dinner an announcement is made. We can't go to Halong Bay. Instead, we will be going to Bangkok. But after the first of 2 sea days, the ship is turned round, and we're told that the cruise will now be ending 5 days early and we're heading straight back to Singapore. That leaves us with a couple more days to enjoy the ship. A full programme of onboard events was going on, including all the usual quizzes, films in the theatre and on the roof terrace, and also archery in the Sky Lounge. One of Millennium's specialty restaurants, Cuisine, is home to an unusual dining experience, Le Petit Chef. Everybody is served at the same time, and before each course, a short animated film is projected onto the tabletops.
I'm not eating that.